Hey guys, what's going on? So in this video, we'll be learning about the class variables. Now, before we move on, I want to tell you that class variables are one of the important aspects of object-oriented programming in Python, and it is not to be confused with the instance variables. So let's quickly understand the difference between instance variables and a class variable. So instance variables are unique to each object. So as you can see that there are so many variables starting with self, self.name, self.id, and self.age. Well, these are unique to particular objects, say Adam. So Adam has name variable as Adam and ID as 123 and age as 24. Now note that these same instance variables are different, have different values when it comes to Bob. So you can say that instance variables are unique among objects. When we come to class variables, well, class variables are shared for all objects. So let's give it a thought. What exactly might be a good candidate for a class variable? Well, let's assume that in our organization there is only one boss. So we can say that boss is a class variable which will be shared among all the objects. So Adam will have a boss, say Aaron. Bob will also have the same boss, Aaron. So let's quickly go ahead and declare the class variable. So in order to declare a class variable, you need to come inside the class and you need to declare any variable name. So let's quickly go ahead and name it as boss, and let's give it a name as Aaron. Cool. So this right here is what we call as the class variable. Now these class variables will be shared among all of these objects. So if I go ahead and print Adam.boss, and if I go ahead and print Bob.boss, they both will print me the same answer because these are shared among them, right? Now there is one more way through which you can actually access this class variable, and that is via the class name itself. So if I go ahead and type employee.boss, you will also notice that it will still give me the same answer. And we will actually take a look into this, that when we can use the class variable versus the object.class variable. Now let's cover the first scenario where we'll be accessing the class variable through the class name. Now, whenever you access the class variable through class name, whatever change that you make will be reflected in all the objects. So here by default, boss is Aaron. So suppose for a particular day, Aaron is on leave, and this time Amy becomes boss. So if you access the class variable via the class name, say employee.boss equals to Amy. Now if we go ahead and print the Adam's boss, and if you go ahead and print the Bob's boss, you notice that now Amy is boss. Since I told you that whenever you access the class variable with a class name, whatever change that you make will be reflected in all the objects. So here one more important thing is that whenever you create a class variable, that object automatically gets that attribute. Now that's how you use class name to access or edit the class variable. Now let's make use of the object name to access the class variable. So if I go ahead and do, say, Adam.boss equals to Amy, and if I go ahead and print Adam.boss and Bob.boss, you would find something really surprising. Now for this case, the boss of Adam is Amy and the boss of Bob is still Aaron. Now let's understand this more deeply. Now notice that if I go ahead and print employee.boss, then also the answer remains same. So employee.boss is Aaron, Adam.boss is Amy, and Bob.boss is Aaron. Now let's understand why. So whenever you use the employee.boss and do the changes inside or edit the value of class variable, it gets shared with all the objects. Now suppose consider a scenario where, say, Adam does not have boss Aaron, where instead has Amy as the boss. You can do that individual change as well. Just instead of putting employee.boss, put that object's name and make the edit. Now this will result in Adam having the attribute boss and the value being Amy. And so for Bob, since we does not have his own unique boss, we'll refer back to the class employee's boss, which is Aaron. Alright, so the question may arise, where do we actually make use of these class variables? So let's quickly understand with the help of an example. Let's go ahead and create a method which will actually print out the boss name. So let's create a method, say boss name, and we pass the self, and inside it we will return the boss class variable. Now you can access the class variable by the class name as well. And remember, we can also access the class variable by the object name as well, the way we saw earlier. We can also do that by, instead of employee, we can make use of self and do that. Now let's consider a scenario where the boss is shared, right? So there is only one boss for all, and that boss is Aaron. So if I go ahead and print out Adam.boss name, and let me quickly go and print out Bob.boss name, and let me clear the screen. You notice that both of them will print out Aaron. Reason? Both of them have the shared boss Aaron, right? Both of them have only one boss, that is Aaron. Let's quickly go ahead and change it to self. This would also print us the same answer since there is no unique boss addressed to a particular object. So if I go ahead and run it, it will still print me the same answer. Now, when to use self.boss and when to use employee.boss. So let's quickly bring back that scenario where Adam got a new boss. So here we can type Adam.boss equals to Amy. And here let's switch it back to employee.boss and find out what exactly it will print out. If you go ahead and run it, you notice that both of them printed out Aaron. But hey, Adam's boss is Amy, isn't it? Now in this scenario where we actually tweak the class variable by using the object, here employee doesn't have its value. Calling the class variable through the employee or using the class name has no importance. So we will change it back to self, and you will notice, and if I go ahead and print that now Adam's boss is Amy and Bob's boss is, like everybody else, it is Aaron. Now I think you got the point of using self while calling the class variable and using this employee or the class name while calling the class variable. Now you might think, why are we actually using the class variables, right? Now generally we make use of class variable to share a particular value which is common for all the objects. So let me actually go ahead and remove this, and let me go ahead and actually remove these as well. Cool. So let's suppose we have so many methods, say boss name and so many other different methods. So for sure we know that the boss is Aaron, so we don't have to go ahead and hardcode the values like return Aaron and so on. So suppose if you are creating a really large class with having 200 to 300 functions, and there if you're not making use of the class variable and rather you are hard coding values like this, and then later that boss gets transferred, you would have to go and find all of these values and would have to replace them, right? Now for these scenarios, class variables are really useful. So instead of going there and replacing, I'll just come above and replace this value to the new boss, who's, let's suppose, Jacob. And if I go ahead and print out the bosses of both the Adam and Bob's, I can easily change all those values instead of going through all those 200 functions and changing them back to Jacob. So that was about the class variables. Now I will once again recap what all we learned today because it was quite confusing, I know that. So I would recommend you to spend a little bit more time understanding what exactly class variables are and the ways you can access these class variables. So in order to assist you, let me actually revisit again. Cool. So we make use of class variables to define a value which is shared by all the objects, say Adam, Bob, and so on. And then suppose in any situation you have to change the class name. Further, you can change it either by coming inside and changing it inside over here, or you can make use of the employee class to change that value to something else, say Aaron. Now if I go ahead and print that value, say Bob's boss, similarly for Adam's boss, that Jacob value will now get overridden with Aaron. So you could either do by going over here and changing this to Aaron, or you can directly refer to the class variable by saying the class name dot that variable and changing that value. Now you could also change the class variable by addressing the object through the object as well. So if I go ahead and type Adam.boss equals to Aaron, now this would actually specify that only for Adam the boss is Aaron, and rest for all other objects the boss is Jacob. That's how you can access the class variables or edit the class variables outside the class. Now if you want to make use of these class variable inside a method, there are two ways you can use that. First is via through class name, and the second way is through the self. Notice that if I just type the name, it will simply throw me the error because, okay, let me go ahead and print it. Print Adam dot boss name. Now, as I told you earlier, that you can't actually refer the class name directly with the name. If I go and run it, it will give me the error. You can make use of the class name inside a method via two way. First is via the class name and then the class variable. And the second way is using the self and calling the class variable. Now let's look at the difference between them very quickly. So if you're calling the class name via the class name, notice that if I bring about any change over here, let's suppose Adam.boss equals to Amy. That means only for Adam, the boss is Amy. And if I go ahead and print Adam's boss name and Bob's boss name, if I go ahead and run it, you will notice that it would still print me Jacob for both. Reason? Now we are considering the class variable, which is bound to this class, right? Now, this is useless when you are having any change that's happening outside the class. So you can make use of self to address this issue. So whenever you did employee.boss, it referred to this boss regardless of self. Now, if you make use of self, instead of going and looking over there, it will look for Adam object and it will refer to the boss attribute. Now, one more important thing is that whenever you create the class variable, say boss, automatically all the object gets this boss attribute and the value as Jacob. Now we came outside and changed the value of boss to Amy, and now we are accessing through self. We are referring to the object's attribute rather than looking at the class variable boss. So in this case, for Adam, the boss is Amy, and for Bob, the boss, since we haven't specified a particular boss, it will automatically refer back to the class variable, which is Jacob. If I run it, you would see the answer would be Amy and then Jacob. Alright guys, I think that's enough for today, and I believe that you understood about class variables and understand that you need to put a little bit of time in understanding what exactly class variables are, because believe me, the more amount of time you put in understanding this, the more better you would be at. You might get confused between self dot class variable or class name dot class variable. I recommend you to experiment with these a little bit so that you are pretty much comfortable with it. That's all for this video, and if you really like this video, you can support us by either subscribing to our channel or liking this video. You can also support us by spreading the word to others who really want to learn about Python and other tech stack, and we'll be gladly ready to help them as well, and this will also help our channel to grow. Alright guys, see you in the next lecture.